Hello, and welcome to Real Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. Pleased to have with me back on the show again today, Jason Aguayo. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thanks, Angela. Good to be here.
And Jason is back for one of our popular segments, She Directs. This is where we look at the work of a prominent female filmmaker, and our criteria is kind of that they need to have directed at least three films that are considered to be pretty great. And we've done quite a few so far. We've done Ida Lupino, and we've looked at the films of Penny Marshall. And this episode, we are looking at the films of comedic great Elaine May, who only directed 4 feature films, so that made it really easy to pick because we're gonna review all 4 of her feature films she directed. But I'm gonna let Jason, who's our resident historian here on things, talk a little bit about Elaine May and some of the other work she's done, of course, because but beyond, she still stayed very active in Hollywood, mostly through writing. So take it away, Jason.
Right. Thanks, Angela. I didn't know a lot, virtually nothing about Elaine May until we started developing this list, and it was one of the first names that you mentioned. And of course, I was familiar with a lot of the films that her comedy partner Mike Nichols had directed, but I didn't know much about Elaine May. Weirdly, Ida Lupino, she was born in Philadelphia, 1932, to Jewish parents who were involved in the Jewish theater. So she spent a lot of her younger years touring the country, going from school to school, performing in this theater, and not really liking school that much. Oftentimes, being enrolled for just a few weeks. But yeah, she came to. Eventually, her dad died when she was fairly young, and they moved to LA. And again, she wasn't that into school, but eventually moved to Chicago, primarily because it was a college that didn't require a high school diploma. But there she was a founding member of a improv group that included Mike Nichols. So they started that group, and eventually the work that she and Nichols had done made them into stars. They were playing in New York on Broadway in the late 50s into early 60s, and put out some albums and won some Grammys for that comedy. It was pretty cutting edge at the time in the fact that it wasn't really like one-liners, they weren't stand-up comedians. They were doing these scenarios where they would act them out. And the improvisational acting was a big part of it. And so they were a big hit at that time. But eventually, I think mostly Elaine May became bored of that, and they broke up in the early 60s. Of course, Mike Nichols went on to direct in the theater and a whole bunch of movies. Elaine May did act some, but as you mentioned, she did a lot of writing and other endeavors. Interesting, in contrasting with Mike Nichols, I mean, I think they both loved actors, but you hear people talk about Mike Nichols and they're super affectionate about him, and I haven't heard the same thing about his productions. Whereas Elaine May, each of these films had, well, with the exception maybe of Heartbreak Kid, had some difficulties in production, but we'll get into that. Anyway, so looking forward to it. Definitely a smart comedic uh, presence. Elaine May, her first movie that we're going to review here was A New Leaf, 1971. And this stars Walter Matthau as a sort of trust fund kid, a spoiled brat who's aging into middle age and discovers that he has ran through all his money. and decides at first that he's just going to off himself, but at the suggestion of his butler, decides that he's going to try and find a rich woman to marry. So he secures a loan from his uncle to keep up appearances and has a pretty tight timeline to find somebody and marry them. So his name is Harry Graham. Strangely, near the timeline, he meets Henrietta Lowell, who is a botanist, but also a rich heiress. Her father has died, and she's sort of inherited this kingdom, but she's incredibly shy and withdrawn, not very confident, and pretty klutzy in social situations. Whereas that's Henry's skill, is how to be a rich person and have the proper manners and everything. Um, so he sets about wooing her, but his plan is actually to kill her and take her wealth and this is his plan as he progresses through marriage, and he keeps looking for an opportunity to make this happen. But in the process, he like is taking care of her and ends up realizing that her staff and lawyer are bilking her out of money, and he fires most of them and kind of takes charge of the household. At some point, on their honeymoon, Henrietta does discover a new species. Again, she's a botanist, and but at some point she goes on a vacation, a canoeing vacation, and Henry sees his opportunity to do the deed. I really enjoyed this movie. I recently rewatched it and came to appreciate a lot of the funny moments because this is kind of Elaine's May, this subtle, sardonic nature of the jokes are situationally based. What did you think, Angela?
Yeah, I really like this movie a lot. This is probably my favorite Elaine movie. Well, it's probably my favorite Elaine comedy, which of course she only made 4 films and 3 of them were comedy. So in terms of just being the funniest consistently, and some of that is what I think is really great chemistry between Elaine May, of course, who stars as Henrietta, and Walter Matthau. They just have great comedic timing together, and they're playing opposites. Of course, he's very uptight and she's loosey goosey and she's always dropping things and he's picking them up. And, despite the fact his character is a real louse, I mean, he is planning to murder his wife after all. So it's a kind of a dark comedy in that way. One of the funny things about it is the film progresses. He starts to have some affection, of course, for this dingy woman that he's married, but also finds that he's like his skills, as you mentioned, not just knowing how to act in upper crust society, but also he starts to look at the way she's like run her household, and basically, her employees, the maids, the butler have been taking advantage of her for years, have just been like robbing her blind. And he's finding all these things because she's such a nice person, but also because she's so focused on her botany, which is all she really cares about is plants, that she's not paying attention to these finer details. So he finds that he actually has some use for the first time in his life, where he's been just kind of this hanger on. He actually has a use and a purpose where he can like help her organize her life. And so his use becomes taking care of Henrietta, which I liked that spin on it. So I think this movie is very funny, and holds up pretty well, actually.
Yeah, agreed. And a lot of funny pieces, I guess, thinking about the awkwardness. The scene where she's got her head through the wrong hole of her dress and he's trying to help her get her dress on correctly. It was just a great example of how awkward she is and how much he's trying to help.
Yeah, and you mentioned apparently there were issues with this movie. I'm not sure if you read into that. I wasn't aware. Did Mathau? I know she often had issues with the actors she worked with. Did her and Mathau get along
I
okay?
think for the most part, this production went smoothly. I think a couple of points. One, the short story actually had Harry or Henry committing a couple of murders, and those were taken out of the primary version, although they filmed that. Apparently, this is, yeah, kind of indicative of May, is she had like a 3-hour version, but the studio took it away from her despite the fact that she had Final Cut, and they released a edited version that cut out those 2 murders. But it was very successful and well received as it was. She sued to try and get her name off of it, and to
Mm.
stop the studio from releasing it.
Yeah, sometimes
Failed.
directors' instincts on the lengths of movies. I mean, maybe it would have been interesting at 3 hours. It seems as it is, it's the perfect length for a comedy. I'm
Right,
not sure how I feel about 3-hour comedies.
right,
I feel like comedy should be shorter and punchier. So
yeah.
yeah, I thoroughly enjoy this one. I highly recommend people check it out. It is one. Shoot, I should have I meant to find out where people could stream this because I've watched it so many times. I actually own it.
I
So
found it at the library, although that copy seems to have gone missing here in Salem. But I did watch it on a streaming service for free. I don't know if we're mentioning those, but I was able to find that just yesterday.
yeah, oh, I see. It isn't, yeah, you can rent it. It is available on some different streaming services, on Pluto, and of course, often you can watch these types of things on YouTube as
Yeah,
well, or I think it's on Prime. Oh, but it's not free on Prime, so you have to pay
yeah,
it.
yeah,
So it's on
yeah,
demand.
yeah. I
It's
think
not really
Plex was
free to
the
many
best
streaming
for me.
services, which is really unfortunate because it's a great comedy. Her films are shockingly difficult to find. I kind of think
Yeah.
one of these days maybe Criterion should put together a collection of all. I mean, it's only four, so it shouldn't be that expensive. But
Well, I
anyway,
guess I will indicate that I saw all of them online for free. So while they're not like packaged somewhere, they are sort of separately
if you
available.
dig around, yeah, you can
Yeah.
find them. So, okay, so we'll move on to the next film, her follow-up to A New Leaf, The Heartbreak Kid from 1972. This is about a newlywed man played by the great Charles Grodin, who starts having doubts about his marriage and falls for another woman while he's on his honeymoon. So he has doubts about his marriage about into day one. And he is played by Charles Grodin, as I mentioned. His wife is played by Jeannie Berlin as the character of Lila, who, in my opinion, just about steals the movie. And she's actually Elaine May's daughter in real life, but she has been very clear in interviews to say that she had to audition for the role like anyone else. And I do believe it because Jeannie Berlin is fantastic in this movie. And Sybil Shepherd plays Kelly, the beautiful blonde who takes Charles Grodin's eye away from his wife. But even before actually he meets Kelly, he's having doubts on the road trip. So they drive from New Jersey to Florida to Miami Beach specifically to have their honeymoon. And on the drive, he starts to have doubts about his new wife. They're singing songs together, and on the first day, he's loving the singing songs together. And by the next time you see him, he's frustrated and disgusted with his new wife. And so this is the story of this is definitely a darker comedy. I'll give you that. It's not a straight through comedy, in my opinion, like A New Leaf, where it's played by not that that one didn't have its dark moments, of course, with the murder and everything, but this one, because the main character, in my opinion, is extremely unlikable. So Charles Grodin's character of Lenny is this guy who basically once he has something, he loses interest in it. That's what I think his character is. Like he is all about Lila until he actually gets her to marry him, and then they get married, and then he starts losing interest almost immediately. And then he meets Kelly, this beautiful blonde who he thinks is kind of like the perfect woman, right? Unlike his more fiery Jewish wife, he has this waspy kind of blonde, idealized woman over here. And so he starts to work very hard, extremely hard on wooing Kelly. And once he gets her interest, he also starts to, we see towards the end, lose interest, which I found fascinating because you think he gets everything he wants. I actually had never seen this film before and I watched it recently and I thought it was going in a different direction. I thought like Kelly was going to basically, kick him to the curb. So it didn't go exactly where I was expecting, but a very interesting movie, the shots are really interesting in this. I'm curious to hear what you have to say, Jason, because I have some things I want to say about some of the way she shot this.
Right. Yeah, again, very enjoyable, very funny, but dark. I made my wife watch these with me, and I think in every Lane movie, she started squirming, saying, "Oh, I can't watch this." And it's not, she's fine with true crime and murder TV and everything, but
It's
just
cringe.
the
It's
right,
cringy.
it's this
It makes you
uncomfortable
uncomfortable.
social
Yeah.
situation. And I guess I wanted to mention Eddie Albert, who plays Sybil
Oh
Shepherd's
yeah.
dad. And yeah, those shots that are with the
So
four of
crowded.
them like in one frame, and Eddie Albert and Charles Grodin playing off of each other, and you just can't believe the stuff that's coming out of his mouth, and just the growing anger and disbelief in everyone else's faces. Yeah, I think this was funny. It may be funnier to me than a New Leaf, but certainly on a darker slant.
Yeah, it's definitely darker than it is. She purposefully did that. So it's not just in that restaurant scene or whatever, they're at the club. I guess it's a club. They're watching a entertainer of some sort on stage who's got to be the least funny entertainer of all time, which just kind of sort of adds to the uncomfortability of the whole scene because he's crowded in with her
Yeah.
parents and this other couple who are at and they're everyone is, and so cringe comedy has come back in recent years. It's a big thing, especially in indie comedies that A24 and places like that have put out. And Elaine May, I'm surprised she hasn't had a career resurgence, except for I think she's in her 90s now, but
Yeah.
she really kind of sealed the cringe comedy. I mean, that was kind of her thing, right? Because when they're on the beach, I don't know if you noticed in the scenes, like it's packed. There's no, it's not like your typical beach scene. When they're in Miami Beach at the hotel, every scene, there's people all around them,
Yeah.
and everyone's lawn chairs are like right next to each other. And so there's this feeling of uncomfortability the whole time. In fact, it isn't till they get to Minnesota towards the later part of the film that you actually have a feeling of spaciousness. And while the whole time they're in Miami, it feels very clustered and uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So yeah, a great comedy. I don't know that there was any problems with this one. I think she has a good relationship with Charles Grodin, who she cast in Three. I think he was in this film, and of course also in Ishtar in a
Right.
smaller role. But so and he's perfect because he has that deadpan humor, so perfect for her style.
Yeah, there are several actors that seem to appear in several of these movies. I thought this one was great. Great Charles Grodin film. Wanted to mention one other 1971, Such Good Friends with Diane Cannon and James Coco, who was in
Mm.
A New Leaf. That was a film that Elaine May had written prior to going on to Heartbreak Kid. But that Heartbreak Kid was a pretty good success. This is probably the only one that didn't have production difficulties and was pretty well received.
Interesting. Oh, so I'm reading right now about it that this is another one she had problems with the studio. The film went over budget and she ended up in a legal battle with Paramount Pictures over post-production costs. At one point, hiding reels of the film in her husband's
Boy, is
friend's
that
garage.
Heartbreak Kid or is that Mikey and Nicky?
Heartbreak Kid, later suing the company for breach of contract. She worked to get the rights to the film released a director's cut of it in 1980. In 2019, May worked with the Criterion Collection to create the director's newest cut.
Are you
The film
sure
is
that's not
gained.
Mikey and Nicky? That sounds like Mikey and Nicky.
Oh, maybe you're right. That's Mikey and Nicky. I'm reading about the wrong
So,
film.
right. So our next film,
Yes, we'll
Mikey
go
and
on to the
Nicky,
next one.
that's okay. That's 1976. And yeah, so this is breaking the mold of the comedies and basically a very small gangster drama. Um, uh, Two actors talk about claustrophobia. It's just these two guys playing off each other most of the time. So Nicky is John Cassavetes, and he's in a hotel room and calls his childhood friend Mikey to come help him out because the mob has a contract for him. And so the whole night is these two guys just hanging out in a hotel room, going to the bar, going to the different places. And I guess talking a little bit about Elaine May and her improv background, she loved actors just playing off of each other. And so this is one of those ones that ran way over budget. Weirdly, she shot three times as much film as Gone with the Wind because she would just wanted to capture everything. Actually, heard one story in the cemetery scene where she said, don't cut the camera, but they only had 10-minute cartridges back then. So they ran out of film. And she
Mm.
still didn't say cut. She was just so into this improv. She just wanted to see them finish it. But, they didn't even get it because the camera had run out of film. So I think this is a good movie, pretty intense. Apparently, the cut that originally came out was done by the studio, and so it had a lot of logical errors and stuff. And they just sort of put it out there for a few weeks just to obligate contracts, but didn't really support the film. So this one was financial failure. Just and in addition to that, the overrunning on budget, and as you said, she's disputed with the studio and held some of the reels from the studio, and it was a long battle after that. Again, it's been reassessed in recent years, and as you said, uh, the new cut of it, a director's cut, does make more sense. And I think that's the one that I saw. It'd be interesting to see the original one, but again, she had tons and tons of footage to work with. Um, but in the end, I think it is a pretty gritty drama about these two guys and their friendship, but also their battles and where they stand in the mob and what's going to happen. It has a pretty dramatic ending, which is pretty satisfying, I thought. But I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I love this film. I do think it's in some ways her best film. The new, I of course haven't seen the version that was released was butchered by the studio. Paramount was so angry at her for being difficult that they basically released the movie in a couple theaters, but they had butchered it. So I've only seen the Criterion Collection version, and this is actually, strangely enough, the easiest of her films to find because it is on the Criterion Collection. So you can find it on streaming on the Criterion channel or buy the Blu-ray of it. And I like it a lot. But I love that Peter, you could have Peter Falk and John Cassavetes read the phone book, and it would be interesting to me. They're both such terrific actors, and here, I mean, it's just the two of them, so they're just really playing off of each other. It has this really wonderful, gritty New York feeling. And so it's definitely not a comedy, unlike a lot of our other films. So that's very different. And for me, a lot of the improvised style works. I will say, at one point, I remember the first time I saw it before I really knew much about Elaine May, which was years ago. I actually thought Cassavetes directed it because it
Hmm.
feels like a Cassavetes film because he
Yeah.
also did gritty New York films with improvised dialogue with small, amounts of actors. And so it has that feeling of a Cassavetes film. But in this case, it is Elaine May. And she, I think, because of her improv background as a comedian, and just loved the fact that these two actors were willing to do that. She, her inability to be a little bit more thrifty though and economic with her filming has hurt her career because it said here that she shot more than 3 times the amount of footage than it took Gone with the Wind to make. And I mean, at some point you do have to have a little bit of a realistic vision when you're making a lower budget, what would be basically considered today an art house movie, let's
Yeah.
face it.
Yeah.
So, and, and not have, I mean, I understand that she had these grand visions and everything, but you have to be a little bit
Yeah,
realistic,
that is
especially.
certainly part of her career is the uncompromising. It's sort of a contrast. She was the first female to do a major movie since Ida Lupino, and Ida Lupino is almost on the opposite side, where she could do these really efficient productions and
Yeah,
really do
exactly.
well with actors and everything.
Yeah, Filipino knew how to work in B movies, so she knew how to make them cheap, fast, and quick, and just do it, get it done. So, but I do really enjoy this film and highly recommend it. So,
Definitely, definitely. So yeah, I
yeah.
want to mention just a couple of things here. So that was 1976. Um, After that, Elaine May did write a movie for Warren Beatty, Heaven Can Wait. I loved that movie as a kid, more of a comedy. Um, and then she did some uncredited stuff for both Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman in Reds and Tootsie,
Mhm.
apparently. But that brings us to 1987.
Yes, for Ishtar, which is, of course, the film that is credited with ending her career. And she got this job because Warren Beatty felt like he owed her because she did so many rewrites and really helped Red. Same thing with Hoffman, as you mentioned. She did uncredited rewrites to punch up the laughs in Tootsie, and we'll never know, how funny it might not have been without Elaine May's contributions, right? So Ishtar is notorious, and I had never seen it before, and just watched it for the first time this week. It is about two aspiring songwriters, and that's a loose term there, who end up going to Morocco to play a gig that they get through their agent, and then end up in sort of a wild Cold War battle, basically, where they're stuck in the middle. And of course, there's a hot French girl involved as well in the whole thing. Here's the thing about this movie: is it has this reputation of being one of the worst movies of all time, and then it also in recent years has been reassessed, and now you go on Letterboxd and you have people giving it 4 or 5 star reviews saying, oh, it's actually one of the greatest comedies of all time. I can tell you. Real Film Snobs fans that it is neither of those things. I wanted it actually to be worse in a way because I was like, you can be so bad it's good, right? Like a movie can be so bad that you're just like, oh, I just have to keep watching this. It's not that bad. It'd almost be impossible with this amount of talent with Hoffman and Beatty to really make a movie that bad, really. I would say particularly the scenes in New York at the beginning are very funny because they're writing their songs and they are horrible songwriters. And I did laugh out loud at how bad some of these songs were. Once they get to Morocco is where the problems begin because it sort of veers into this becomes like an action comedy. And I understand that May was very influenced. She was trying to make like the Bing Crosby, Bob Hope Road to Morocco movies. But the problem is once she gets over there, the film kind of loses its thread a little bit, and it seems like it's veering off into, uh, it doesn't date well. Let's just say that some of the portrayals of the folks of Morocco, the whole through line with the woman from France, like was just totally unnecessary, I thought. So it loses its steam, I think, once they get to Morocco. So I don't think it's a great comedy. I also don't think it's one of the worst movies of all time, though. It'd been more fun to watch if it was, probably.
Yeah, famously, May has said, if everybody who hated Ishtar saw it, I'd be a rich woman. But
Yeah,
it had such a reputation because of the bad production and relationship did sour with Beatty. They would fight over shots and things, and she was pretty, perfectionist. I guess one note: the actress who played that, I guess she's French, but she's supposed to be Middle Eastern or something. Um, she
yeah.
was dating Warren Beatty at the time,
That's
and
how she got the role.
yeah, and didn't get
Yeah.
along with May, and then that sort of soured their relationship. But yeah, I think as you said, there's funny parts. I think the songwriting is funny. Paul Williams, the songwriter, actually did the whole soundtrack, and that was one of the things they did was actually write these songs for the movie, even though they weren't really even performing them so much. Um, but yeah, like you said, in the New York scenes, there's a great scene where Dustin Hoffman's out on the ledge and he's gonna off himself, and Warren Beatty comes out and he has this great line about, how much courage it takes to be as old as you are and have nothing, So there is a lot of funny interaction, but yeah, they're almost too big of boobs and too much action and helicopters and stuff once they get to Morocco, which
Yeah.
apparently they actually filmed on site because of some connection with Coca-Cola, who had money there that they couldn't bring back to the U.S. or something.
Right.
So yeah,
And
it
this
spent way, way more than it
this was
needed.
Coca-Cola's foray into movie making, and then their end of they was so expensive. It cost 50 plus million dollars, only made less than 10 million at the box office. And so Coca-Cola said, we're getting out of the movie business. So they offshot Columbia Pictures. That's actually what created Columbia Pictures was this movie's failure. But yeah, they shot in Morocco despite the fact that it was horribly expensive and there was actually real wars going on and there was death threats on Dustin Hoffman
Right.
because he was so famous. So it was it was funny because in Wikipedia they actually said that there was someone who read an early script said, I think what you should do is keep it all in New York. And I said, yes, that's what they should have done because the scenes in New York are the best scenes in the movie. But it's not as bad as its reputation. It's also not as good as some of the new critics who are saying it's, someone said it should be in the top 100 comedies of all time. And I would say to that, no.
Yeah.
But yes, but this was a fun episode, Jason. What would you say was your favorite of the four?
That's tricky. I mean, I like Mikey and Nicky, but again, it's the total opposite. I think Heartbreak Kid was the funniest to me, but all of them have a place in my heart.
Yeah, so definitely check out some Elaine May movies, support an independent American filmmaker who is still alive. And thank you, Jason, for coming on the show. Appreciate you as always. Always check out our YouTube page and make sure you subscribe for future episodes.
Just want
And
to say one thing. She did have some writing credits with Mike Nichols late in the '90s, The Birdcage, Primary Colors, and also a remake of Heaven Can Wait called Down to Earth. So she's still working, still getting awards on stage. So check out Elaine May.
great. Thank you, Jason. And thank you, everyone. Have a great day and great movies.